Did you know that people spend thousands of dollars to get a higher ACT reading score, and all they really need to do in order to get that higher score is read? So if you have yourself a copy of this story by Willa Cather that's called Paul's Case, I'm going to read that, and as I'm reading it, I'm going to define vocabulary words, because ACT reading test is really hard to move. So if you're a sophomore, if you're a ninth grader or something like that, that's good. If you're taking the test tomorrow, no. It takes a long time to move that score. You have to spend a lot of time reading, hours and hours and hours reading, because that test is ultimately a test of your reading speed and your vocabulary. The best way to acquire new vocabulary is to read it in the context of things that are good. So we have here a short story by Willa Cather called Paul's Case, which is pretty amazing. And I'm going to read this puppy down, and I'm going to define all the words that are the type of words that you might find on your ACT. But, you know, I'm an English teacher, so also these are the type of words that you want to have because you actually make your world out of words. It's true. So, here we go. It was Paul's afternoon to appear before the faculty of the Pittsburgh High School to account for his various misdemeanors. So the word to account here is kind of used in the same way we would say to hold accountable, like accountability. Hold accountable. Various misdemeanors. A misdemeanor, you might get one for speeding. In this, it's a slightly different context. It's just like misbehaviors. He had been suspended a week ago, and his father had called the principal's office and confessed his perplexity. Perplexity means confusion. Like total confusion. It's a little bit more than just confusion. Perplexity is like a puzzle you can't figure out about his son. Paul entered the faculty room suave. Here's a little Spanish word that's entered our language, which basically in English, in this case, it means smooth. He's looking good. He's feeling good. Paul entered the faculty room suave and smiling. His clothes were a trifle. Trifle means a little bit. Outgrown, and the tan velvet on the collar of his open overcoat was frayed and worn. But for all that, there was something of the dandy about him. A dandy is kind of like usually a man who is suave, who is well-dressed. Maybe like a little bit flashy. And he wore an opal pin in his neatly knotted black four-in-hand. Four-in-hand here as a style of knot for necktie. So this is a tie. Knot. He wore a black opal. An opal is like a precious stone, carnation, and a red carnation in his buttonhole. This latter is a word that if you don't know, used in this context, you got to learn it because you're going to see it all the time. Latter basically means like latest. And usually it's used like the last one that was mentioned. So the latter, this latter adornment, an adornment is a decoration. The faculty somehow felt was not properly significant of the contrite. Contrite means sorry. Spirit, befitting. Befitting. Appropriate. A boy under a ban of suspension. Paul was tall for his age and very thin, with high, cramped shoulders and a narrow chest. His eyes were remarkable for a certain hysterical brilliancy. Hysterical in this context really means like high energy, almost out of control. Hysterical, a lot of times we talk about like, oh, that's hysterical, that's really funny. Well, a deeper meaning of the word is kind of like this, out of control. Like it's hysterical. Hysterical means like, oh, it's so funny, like I can't control myself. His eyes were remarkable for a certain hysterical brilliancy. And brilliancy right here means brightness. And he continually used them in a conscious, theatrical sort of way, peculiarly offensive in a boy. The pupils were abnormally large, and as though he were addicted to belladonna, but there was a glassy glitter about them which the drug does not produce. When questioned by the principal as to why he was there, Paul stated politely enough that he wanted to come back to school. This was a lie, but Paul was quite used to lying. Found it indeed indispensable. To dispense is to do away with. Indispensable means you cannot do away with. So it means necessary. 100% necessary for overcoming friction. Friction in this sense, friction is a word from science that means, what it means. But in this case, friction is more like drama or problems. His teachers were asked to state their respective charges. Respective means like each one got to do it, like to each. Respective means to each. Charges against him, which they did with such rancor. Oh, rancor is a great word. Rancor is like dripping with anger. Dripping with anger. Aggrievedness. If you're aggrieved, that means like you have been wronged. Anger, been wronged. Evinced, shown by, or shown, I would say shown in this case. Shown. Evinced. That this was not a usual case. Disorder and impertinence. Impertinence is like just continued disrespect, or like you think that you're above the rules. Impertinence means like you feel like you're very special. Let's say above the rules. And it's also like you don't care. Above rules, don't care if people are mad at you. Above rules, don't care. Impertinence were among the offenses named. Yet each of his instructors felt that it was scarcely possible to put into words the real cause of the trouble, which lay in a sort of hysterically defiant manner in the boys, in the contempt. Contempt is just like contempt is just like, I don't know, bottomless anger, or contempt is, it's a great word. It's like lack of respect. Contempt, lack of respect for, I don't know, I'm just gonna put lack of respect. Contempt. It's related to like anger, disregard for someone's feelings, which they all knew he felt for them, and which he seemingly made not the least effort to conceal. Once, when he had been making a synopsis is like a summary of a paragraph at the blackboard, his English teacher had stepped to his side and attempted to guide his hand. Paul had started back with a shudder and thrust his hands violently behind him. The astonished woman could scarcely have been more hurt and embarrassed had he struck at her. The insult was so involuntary and definitely personal as to be unforgettable. Involuntary means like it was like a reaction. In one way and another, he had made all his teachers, men and women alike, conscious of the same feeling of physical aversion. And aversion is like get away. Like, I'm just going to write get away. Aversion means like dislike, but you can't be around it. Like I would prefer not to be around something. In one class, he habitually sat with his hand shading his eyes. In another, he always looked out the window during the recitation. That's like lecture. It's an old word. You won't see that word again. In another, he made a running commentary on the lecture with humorous intent. His teachers felt this afternoon that his whole attitude was symbolized by his shrug and his flippantly is like, don't care. Red carnation flower. And they fell upon him without mercy, his English teacher leading the pack. He stood through it smiling, his pale lips parted over his white teeth. His lips were continually twitching, and he had a habit of raising his eyebrows. That was contemptuous. There's that word again, contempt. This is just that word used as an adjective. So contemptuous and contempt. Same thing. Contemptuous and irritating to the last degree. Older boys than Paul had broken down and shed tears under that ordeal, but his set smile did not once desert him. And his only sign of discomfort was the nervous trembling of the fingers that toyed with the buttons of his overcoat and an occasional jerking of the other hand which held his hat. Paul was always smiling, always glancing about him, seeming to feel that people might be watching him and trying to detect something. This conscious expression, since it was as far as possible from boyish mirthfulness. Mirthfulness means good humor. Good humor. We don't know what good humor means. Mirthfulness means joy and fun. Was usually attributed to insolence. Insolence is kind of related to contempt. It's like offensiveness. Disrespect. As the Inquisition proceeded, Inquisition meaning a questioning, proceeded meaning continued. One of his instructors repeated an impertinent. I think this is the second time we've seen impertinent as well. Remark. A remark is a statement. And the principal asked him whether he thought that a courteous speech. Courteous is like courtesy, which is from polite. Speech to make to a woman. Paul shrugged his shoulders slightly, and his eyebrows twitched. "I don't know," he replied. "I didn't mean to be polite or impolite either. I guess it's just sort of a way I have of saying things regardless." That's his tone. That's exactly what he would sound like. The principal asked him whether he didn't think that a way it would be well to get rid of. Paul grinned and said he guessed so. But when he was told he could go, he bowed gracefully and went out. His bow was like a repetition of the scandalous. Repetition, repeat, of the scandalous, which is just another word for like just wildly inappropriate. Red carnation, which is a flower. His teachers were in despair, and his drawing master voiced the feeling of them all when he declared there was something about the boy which none of them understood. He added, "I don't really believe that smile of his comes altogether from insolence. There's something sort of haunted about it. The boy is not strong, for one thing. There is something wrong about the fellow." The drawing master had come to realize that, in looking at Paul, one saw only his white teeth and the forced animation. Animation is movement. We said that they're kind of sparkling, so that's really what it means here, like sparkle or shine or animation or activity. I'm just going to write sparkle because that's a fun word. One warm afternoon, the boy had gone to sleep at his drawing board, and his master had noted with amazement that what a white, blue-veined face it was, drawn and wrinkled like an old man's about the eyes, the lips twitching, even in his sleep. His teachers left the building dissatisfied, which is the opposite of satisfied, unsatisfied, and unhappy, humiliated. Humiliated is a word that's slightly stronger than embarrass. To have felt so vindictive. Vindictive is one of those words that means the way it sounds. To be vindictive is to get revenge. It's a great word. No, don't get revenge. Toward a mere boy. To have uttered this feeling. Uttered comes from utterance, which is something said. To have uttered this feeling in cutting terms. Terms in this case means like, term is a very versatile word, but basically it means in a cutting way. And in this case, cutting means like sharp, harsh, biting, mean, basically. In exactly this context, cutting means mean. And to have set each other on, as it were, in the gruesome game of intemperate's a great word. Intemperate, so to temper something is to kind of like shape it. Intemperate means like out of control. Intemperate reproach. A reproach is, another word for that is chastisement. Another word for that is to, reproach is to call someone out, I guess is the way we talk about it now. Call someone out. So it was a reproach. They were calling him out for his bad behavior, but it was kind of out of control how they did it, and they felt guilty, humiliated, embarrassed. One of them remembered having seen a miserable street cat set at bay by a ring of tormentors. Tormentors are torturers. As for Paul, He ran down the hill, whistling the soldier's chorus from Faust, looking wildly behind him now and then to see whether some of his teachers were not there to witness his light-heartedness. As it was now late in the afternoon and Paul was on duty that evening as usher at Carnegie Hall, he decided Carnegie Hall, I'll just define it as if it were a vocabulary word, it's actually a place, is a very, very famous theater. One of the most famous theaters in the world. And it was there in the 1920s, and it's still there now. He decided he would go home to supper. When he reached the concert hall, the doors were not yet open. It was chilly outside, and he decided to go up into the picture gallery, always deserted at this hour, where there were some of Raphael's gay studies of Paris, which gay in this sense means like delightful, happy. The old meaning of the word, not used too frequently in 2019. Delightful. Fun. And studies, in this case, are paintings. He's looking at paintings of Paris streets and an airy blue Venetian scene or two that always exhilarated him. Exhilarated is a great word. It means like energized. It's like energy plus sometimes joy, but more like it's more neutral than that. I guess it's just kind of energy and vitality. He was delighted to find no one in the gallery but the old guard, who sat in the corner, a newspaper on his knee, a black patch over one eye, and the other closed. Paul possessed himself of the place and walked confidently up and down, whistling under his breath. After a while he sat down before a blue Rico and lost himself. When he bethought him to look at his watch, normally we don't see this construction in English, but this basically means he decided. It's kind of an older way of stating things. He bethought himself. He decided. And it almost fits with Paul's character, just to, analyze a little bit here. He bethought him to look at his watch is the kind of thing, because he's kind of a fancy, kind of a young man. He rose with a start and ran downstairs, making a face at Augustus Caesar, peering out from the cast room, and an evil gesture at the Venus de Milo as he passed her. This is a statue. It's a very famous kind of statue of Venus de Milo. When Paul reached the usher's dressing room, half a dozen boys were there already and began excitedly to tumble into his uniform. It was one of the few that at all approached fitting, and Paul thought it very becoming. Becoming means like good-looking, fetching, which is not used very much either anymore. Becoming is like looked good, in fashion. Though he knew the tight, straight coat accentuate something. It's a very good word to know. It's to bring attention to. His narrow chest, about which he was exceedingly, a very versatile word, exceedingly. You'll see it lots of different places. To exceed is like to go beyond, which he was like super sensitive. Exceedingly means basically super. He was always excited while he dressed, twanging all over to the tuning of the strings and the preliminary. Preliminary means like early. Early. Flourishes are like fancy turns. That's what a flourish is. It's a fancy turn. And so if it's a musician, these are horns in the music room. Fancy turns would be the guys are warming up, going. But tonight, he seemed quite beside himself. Beside himself is like, again, that's that out of control, like overcome. He's overstimulated, I guess, would be beside himself. Overstimulated. perhaps because he got in trouble, or because he didn't care that he got in trouble and he felt empowered. And he teased and plagued. Plagued in this sense means bothered. The boys, until telling him that he was crazy, they put him down on the floor and sat on him. And that's 25 minutes, so I don't know how many words that is, 30, 40, you can count them up. Enjoy these wonderful words. Take them with you wherever you go, because now your world is bigger.